So in this presentation, we're going to look at some more transactional writing for Section B of the English Language exam. In this case, we're going to look at the form of the newspaper and magazine article. So, as it says, one of the possible forms of writing you will be given in Section B of the exam is the newspaper or magazine article. And it is important that we understand that this is an article, not a newspaper report, which is a different form. As we've mentioned before in our previous presentation on formal letters, the tone and register of the article will be determined by three aspects: the audience, the topic, and the purpose. So who we're writing for, what we are writing about, and what we are trying to achieve. However, and this is important to note, the form of newspaper and magazine articles tends to be more conversational. So it doesn't matter how serious your topic is, the examiner will expect to see some level of informality at times in your writing. That is the actual register of a newspaper and magazine article. So again, we're going to talk about the voice in your article. So whereas we've talked about the very formal voice that you might expect to get in a formal letter, articles tend to be personal opinion pieces and comments on particular topics. So that means the following conventions will apply. As I mentioned, a conversational tone. And that conversational tone means that there will be a balance between a formal and informal register. And also, because they are personal opinions, these articles tend to be argumentative, persuasive, and of course biased. You are putting forward your point of view after all. So you've got to make it clear that you feel strongly, one way or the other, about the issue being discussed. As I've mentioned before, examiners know if you are not interested. So if it is a topic that you've been given that might not be something that you care greatly about, you have to find it in yourself to find a voice that does care about it, whether it's angry or whether it's happy, whether it's supportive or not. You have to find that voice inside and bring it out in your writing. So you'll also find that your voice in the article is very close to the voice you would use in a speech. They are very, very similar pieces of writing. And when I talk about speeches in another presentation, you will see how that overlaps. So, like we talked about with the letter, there are very clear, distinct conventions that you can use immediately to show the examiner that you know that you are writing one of these articles. And like the letter starts with "Dear Sir, Madam," and then it says, "I am a letter," if you use a headline and a strapline, you are showing that you know you are writing an article. So a headline, it should be short and punchy, and it should make the topic of the article clear. They're a great opportunity to use emotive language, alliteration, and maybe sometimes a question. So in my example here, I've got a variety of different things going on. Volunteering, social support, or slave labour. So it's nice and short. We've got the use of the colon to show that we can use more advanced punctuation. We've got the alliteration of social support or slave labour, which is attention grabbing. And then we've got the question. And because we've offered, whether it is social support or slave labour, that question mark, A, it wants the audience, the reader, to think about it, but B, it tells the reader we are going to answer that question with our opinion. Now, straplines you may or may not have come across before. Now, they're found just underneath the headline, and they add a little more detail for the reader about the article's content. So carrying on from our headline from before, I've gone with the strapline. Government measures to enforce volunteering for teenagers leads to backlash from parents and schools. Andrew Kirk comments. So I've given a little bit more detail about what it is that has prompted me to write this article. Okay, I've talked about the fact that the government has decided that they're going to try and enforce volunteering, and that there has been some kind of pushback from parents and schools about them forcing it. And then, of course, I put in Andrew Kirk comment because I am the writer, so I get my byline. Now, one thing to note here, the strapline is written in the present tense because what you are writing about is an ongoing issue. It's something that either is in the news regularly or it's something that the examiner is pretending is in the news. But because it's an ongoing issue, you should write about it in the present tense. And also note that I have removed the determiners from my strapline. Okay, so I've got rid of anything like a, an, the, or some, and that helps to keep it brief. But it just means that it sounds a little bit like a note rather than a full sentence. And this is the time when that would be acceptable. That is the convention of straplines. So let's talk about the opening. The opening paragraph. This is the one that I find students struggle with most frequently, often because they don't have a great deal of experience with reading this kind of newspaper or magazine article. So they're not certain how it should sound. So the opening to articles are one of the more difficult parts to get right. Like a letter's opening paragraph, you've got to grab your audience's attention, that's part of the article, establish what you are writing about, the topic, establish your point of view, and also set the tone for your argument. Okay, all things that you know about from talking about letters. Now, there are different ways you can open an article, and they're great ways of using a variety of different aspects of the De Forest persuasive techniques. So you could open with a question and then an answer. Should we be forcing teenagers to volunteer? This is the hot topic in the press at the moment. Personally, and then you lay out whatever your point of view is. So we ask the question again, should we be doing this? And then you immediately answer. Okay? Could go with a bold statement. Just make it clear from the start. Forcing teenagers to volunteer is a ridiculous idea. Now, as I've done previously in other presentations, the adjective ridiculous could be changed for anything. So it's highlighted and underlined so that you know that you can just change it. So forcing teenagers to volunteer is an outstanding idea, an excellent idea, a brilliant idea, appalling idea, outrageous idea. You can use that phrase, change it for what you need, and just change the adjective so it represents your point of view. Now, if you don't want to come across as being quite so overbearing, so forceful, if you want to sound a little bit more reasonable, then you can do that. You can balance your opening. I'm pretty certain trying to force teenagers to do anything is a bad idea, let alone something as important as volunteering. So you immediately recognize that what's being suggested is a bad idea, but you are also recognizing that volunteering itself is important. And look at that opening there. I'm pretty certain it's that conversational tone. It makes you more amenable to your audience. You don't come across as being too overbearing, too forceful. And so actually an audience might be more inclined to listen to you. Or you could go with shock factor, the shocking statistic. Only 10% of young people between the ages of 15 and 19 take part in any kind of volunteering. And I've reinforced that 10% statistic with only 10% of any kind of volunteering. And then I go, let that sink in. A nice, short, imperative sentence. Repetition now. Only 1 in 10 young people are giving back to their community. I rephrase my statistic. I go from 10% to 1 in 10. It reinforces just how small a percentage it is of people getting involved in this volunteering. And then I state my case. The government thinks that should change. Dash, I agree. Okay, and again, you could change that. I disagree if you so believe that that's the case. Okay, right, let's move on then. So now I'm going to skip through the next few slides pretty quickly. If you've not watched the presentation on writing formal letters, then after this presentation, go watch that, because what I'm about to talk about repeats much of what I go into detail about in the formal letter presentation. And so you can get the information there. So the body of the article, just like all these pieces of writing, really, that you are going to be asked to do, they all cover the same ground. So you are going to make several argumentative points, and each one will get its own paragraph, and it will be dealt with clearly and in detail. And each one of those paragraphs will use a variety of persuasive techniques that we will maybe mention later on briefly in this presentation. And as I've said before, the examiner is going to expect about 4 to 5 well-developed, and I do mean well-developed paragraphs, not 2 or 3 sentences, preferably 5, 6, 7 sentences, long sentences, detailed sentences in these paragraphs. So you've got to have in your plan 4 or 5 clearly different points that you want to make about your overall argument. Discourse markers. Discourse markers should start each of your paragraphs. They're there to show that you're developing an argument, moving on to a new topic, or looking at an alternative point of view. And again, if you see the formal letter presentation, there is a list of all the different discourse markers there that you could use. Again, because it's argumentative and persuasive, we would expect you to use the De Forest writing techniques, and here they are. You can pause this whenever you want to and have a look at them there. I talk them through, as I've said many times now, in the formal letter presentation, so I'm not going to do that here. Now, we're back into the idea of writing this article. So just like in the letter, where you had a distinct way of finishing, a concluding paragraph, and then yours sincerely or yours faithfully. So the article also has a very specific way of finishing. So like your opening paragraph, it's going to be short, probably 1 or 2 sentences. And again, it's got a clear purpose. Sum up your argument, restate your point of view. Be confident that you've succeeded in your purpose, but maintain that direct to audience conversational tone. Link it back to your opening paragraph. Now, this is really key. Obviously, you're going to link back to your opening paragraph because you are restating your point of view. But the examiner loves it if not only you restate your point of view, but if you use the phrasing that you've used earlier on. It makes the examiner see that you've not just thought about rewriting your article paragraph by paragraph, but that you've considered the overall structure, that there is a link between everything from all the way through, but also from start to finish. So if you've opened with the question, finish with the question. So, do we need to force teenagers to volunteer? I think it's clear, and then you would restate your argument. If you've gone with the bold statement, go back to that bold statement. Of course, it is ridiculous to make teenagers volunteer. There are obviously better ways, and then that's the summing up of whatever you've said earlier in your article. If you went for the voice of reason, go back to it. Forcing teenagers to volunteer might not work, but encouraging other forms of social support might. Not only have you gone back to the phrasing of the opening statement that you made, but also you've got the might not might phrasing of this final sentence, which again is just a nice piece of writing. It's a nicely crafted piece of writing. And then finally, if you've gone with the shocking statistic, again, go back to it. 1 in 10 teenagers volunteering is appalling. It's time we turned that around. And you would finish there. What you can see through all of these, though, if you look here, is that conversational tone still comes through. So that is something that we say. It's not something that we write. If you did that in Word, it would probably put a wiggly line underneath it because you are opening with a conjunction. Okay, of course, again, it's something that we would say rather than something that we should write. But it is the convention of articles. It is that conversational tone. And so with that, I'm going to wrap this up. Okay, hopefully you've now got a good idea of how a newspaper or magazine article should sound, the kind of conventions that the examiner is going to be expecting to see. Okay, but also you can see how it links to the other forms of writing that you've learnt about. And so there's only a few differences between writing a letter, writing an article, writing a speech. Okay, so you just have to learn those few differences, but the majority of your writing skills are the same. With that, thank you.